Welcome to the Fresh Heart Project. Today I am delighted to welcome my good friend Dr Orlena Kerek to the show to discuss how we can create lasting, healthy habits. Before we get into this episode, if you want to keep up to date with all things Fresh Heart, please subscribe to our podcast, available on all popular podcast platforms. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to hit the bell for notifications on all new videos. In my experience, we generally know what we need to eat and how we need to exercise. The difficulty and the pain point is making it part of your life so that you do it without thinking. That's why I'm so excited to share this conversation. Orlena and I discuss how we can create healthy habits that become part of your everyday routine. Orlena trained as a paediatric doctor and is now an advocate for family health. Not only that, she is also an empowerment mentor, a pioneer, an educator, and mother to 4 beautiful children. She wants you to create healthy habits so you feel fit and fabulous without having to think about it. Orlena, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us today on the Fresh Heart Project. Thank you for joining us and talking about a really important topic, and that is the topic of habits.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my absolute pleasure.
Oh, now, Orlena, I've known you for quite some time and I've been following you and a big fan of yours. But I want to talk, before we start on the proper podcast topic, about #VeggieDance. Can you tell the listeners what #VeggieDance is? It's amazing. I think it can be a movement.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. And well, thank you for bringing up veggie dances. So the backstory is, you know, as an entrepreneur, we always have to do something social media. And I have to confess, social media isn't my favorite aspect of my job. But somebody said to me, oh, you should do these reel things on Instagram. And you know what? I'm like, oh my goodness, there are so many videos. I don't understand Instagram, but I can do this. It's 15 seconds. What can I do in 15 seconds that really just says, this is my message? And my message in life is eat more vegetables. Well, my nutritional message in life is eat more vegetables. So I decided just to make it fun and just do a silly little dance. And it's about easy and fun. And so, yes, I challenge you to do a #VeggieDance.
I encourage everyone to log on to Instagram, go to Orlena's page and watch them. They are really great. And I don't know how you got your entire family doing them as well.
Well, you need somebody to record it. So it started off with my daughter, who's 8. She wanted to record it. And if you watch closely, you can see me sort of saying, you need to turn it off now. You need to turn it off now. And then obviously the kids wanted to do it. So they saw me and, do you know, I love this as an example of how do we get our kids to do things? We do it and then they want to copy us, and they saw me doing it. And so they wanted to do it. And now they say to me, oh, can we do the veggie dance too? And I even got my husband doing a veggie dance to Guns N' Roses, no less.
You did get your husband doing it. I love that. Your mother inspiring family. Brilliant. Now, Orlena, we're just going to start by talking a little bit about your journey. Now, you started off your career in the NHS as a paediatric doctor. So how did your life unfold to take you from that to where you are today?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And I think, well, you know what it's like working in the NHS. It's stressful and it's exhausting, as much as it's wonderful as well. But there's, you know, the two elements. And I remember when we had the outbreak of swine flu, being pregnant. And at that time, this was before we had vaccinations to swine flu. I was working in paediatrics, and the advice was that pregnant women weren't supposed to come into contact with swine flu. Now, to cut a long story short, I ended up doing a weekend of nights, being in general paediatrics, the registrar on call for general paediatrics, seeing so many people with query swine flu. And afterwards, I said to the consultant, that didn't go very well. Now, she was obviously very stressed at the time, and we were on the phone and just, you know, breakdown in communications, bit of a disaster, me in floods of tears. And I'd always had this desire to move abroad. And it was just that pivotal point of why am I waiting to do this? And I think as I look back, part of it was this, do you know what? I'm working in paediatrics and our focus is on looking after children, and that includes unborn children, and yet somehow my child doesn't count. Now, and I say this from a place of, I know it's stressful and everyone's so overworked, and the whole system is to stop the emergencies, to deal with those emergencies, but not really thinking about prevention. Now, to cut a long story short, we moved to Spain and I started doing work online. I originally started doing healthy eating for kids and picky eating because, hey, guess what? I had picky eaters. But really, it's all about, if we lead a healthy life, we don't need to go to the doctors. Just think, if everybody led a healthy life, the NHS would have far fewer patients and far fewer people working for it. And the whole emphasis would be on, hey, you know what? We can all just lead this amazing life.
No, absolutely. And I think it paints a clear picture of where you were in the NHS, what prompted you to move, and then set up what you are doing today. And I just wanted to delve a little bit deeper, because when you move away from a very busy, demanding career, and you're in a different country and you have children, how was that? I really applaud you for doing that and having the courage to step away and doing that. Was that must have come with its own challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was difficult, and definitely, we're talking about habits today, and I was definitely in the habit of running around and never stopping. And I found it really, really difficult to sort of come to this grinding halt and be able to relax. And my days were my own. But somewhere in my brain, it was saying, all you're doing is being a mother. All you're doing is working out what's for dinner, and your kids aren't going to eat it anyhow. That's nothing. Whereas I was used to rush, never resting, and the change was amazing. And on one level, we'd moved to Spain and my friends would say, oh, you live the dream life on holiday. But it wasn't like that. It was like I had lost my identity, and it wasn't easy. And for me, it was that journey of, oh my goodness, what's happened to me? And seeing myself being this person that I didn't want to. I had 4 young kids, 4 of them under 4.5. I had twins. And seeing myself being far more grumpy than I wanted to be, not turning up like I wanted to turn up, and really figuring out, okay, so I have the self-awareness that this isn't great, but how do I change that? And creating the tools to do that, to get to where I wanted to do. So I'm very grateful for the journey, but at the time, no, it wasn't easy. And it wasn't always fun. But on the other hand, we were living in Spain, and it was a bit like being on holiday. It's wonderful here. But, that's life. There's good bits and there's bad bits. It's never, it's all peaches and cream, or, it's what we make of it, really. And I think for me, it just gave me those tools, which I still use today and teach my clients now.
Yeah. And what I love about your journey is that you took that and you took the issues and you turned them into something that is really powerful and helping loads of people today. So I do want to say that, you're an inspiration to me, and thank you for putting out great content, which we will talk about. I guess, your experience with your own journey, has that informed how you coach your women clients today?
Well, thank you again. And I'm so honoured for you to say, of you of all people, you're an inspiration to me. So I'm very honoured that you say I'm an inspiration to you. And yes, of course, it has entirely guided me, because I'm not unusual. I'm just a body. I think our bodies are amazing, but we have a mind and we have our bodies. And so I go through the same journey, or have been through the same journey. I was in the same place as other people are. And everyone has their unique problem, but on one level, it's all pretty much the same. And so when I teach healthy living, I teach 4 pillars, because I see so many people trying to make it complicated. And most people don't understand how easy it is. And I tell them, I can make it more complicated if you want. And I laughingly say, I'm all about vegetables. But the reality is actually, if people ate more vegetables, that's a really giant step in terms of being more healthy. And again, movement, it's not rocket science. It's just go out and do it. And people don't have a problem with understanding what they ought to do. They have a problem with applying it. And that's what we'll talk about, is the habits.
Yeah.
It's really all about habits. So yes, my, breaking it down and having a look at how we look after ourselves and why we don't do these things. I'm using myself as a guinea pig all the time and seeing what is it that inspires me and how do I make myself do things, which is the same as other people. Now, we all have to have self-awareness. So what inspires me might be slightly different from somebody else. But as long as we start with that self-awareness piece and keep it simple, we're on an amazing track to success.
And I think you said something really important there, is that we generally know what we need to do. It's just hard to incorporate that into your life and make that a habit, which brings us really nicely onto our topic, which is habit. So, Orlena, how would you define a habit?
Well, habits are things that we do repetitively without thinking about it. And that's the key. So many people say to me, oh, I want to lead a healthy life on autopilot without thinking about it. And those little words, without thinking about it, essentially mean I've built up these habits so that I'm doing it all without thinking about it. Now, the issue with habits, what we're talking about and saying, oh, it's really difficult because I've got these habits, is that they're a double-edged sword in terms of we're busy doing all of these things that we're not aware of, leading an unhealthy life, and we want to get to leading a healthy life. Our brains don't care whether we have got a healthy habit or an unhealthy habit. For our brains, it's exactly the same thing. It's like, oh, we just do this thing without thinking about it. Now, obviously, the consequences for our body is huge. So, you can have a habit of sitting on the sofa every single day, drinking wine. That's not a great habit. Or you can have the habit of getting up at 7 o'clock in the morning and doing a 7-minute workout. It's still a habit, but the effect that it has on our body is huge. And so then the big question becomes, okay, so how do I change my habits? And that's the interesting bit, what I call the rickety bridge from A to B.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk about that, because that's the thing, isn't it? That, it's really important to know that our brain just defaults to what it knows, doesn't it? And it's about creating those healthy habits that we do without thinking. So how do we kind of how do we then create those habits that are healthy?
Yeah, and I think if we take a step back and have a think about our brains and have a think about, well, why do we have habits? And the answer is they're really efficient and they get the job done. So I'm not a neuroscientist and I love learning about the brain, but I explain it in a very simple way. We have this bit at the front of our brain called our prefrontal cortex, and that's our thinking bit where we make all of these decisions, where we're planning, where we're doing all that sort of, high cerebral stuff. And then we have other bits of our brain, which, they're all lumped together, but we'll call it the sort of more unconscious bit. And part of that unconscious bit is the habit brain. And that habit brain just does things automatically without thinking about it because it's easy and it doesn't take so much energy. When we're using our prefrontal cortex, it's like driving your car in a low gear. Whereas when you're using your habit brain, it's just, you're zipping along, just doing things, cruising along without really paying much attention. So it uses much, much less energy. So it's fabulous for us. It gets things done, but it sometimes gets the wrong thing done. So when we think about how are we going to make changes, number one step is always to start with self-awareness, because the issue here is we aren't aware that we're doing these things. So you really have to become aware. And it's almost like you do a habit audit. And in fact, this is one of the things that I take people through. We do a little habit audit in my challenge that I do. We do this challenge where we become aware of all the things that we do and just write it all down. So, for example, you probably don't think about brushing your teeth every morning. It's not like you wake up and think, oh, I better make sure I clean my teeth. I'm going to go and find this thing called a toothbrush and, oh, I will marry the toothpaste. And do you know what I mean? It's just we do it without thinking. And there's so many things that we do without thinking. It may be the way we talk or the way we think or the way we respond to something in an emotional way. These are all habits. It may be the actions that we take. So how we cook, how we shop, the way we drive to work, the way we walk to school, all of these things are habit. And step number one is really becoming aware of which habits we have and then deciding, okay, these habits are serving me. These habits are not serving my goal of being healthy. And how can I change those? So that's step number one.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important step, isn't it? To know that this is what I'm doing consciously, because so much of what we do is unconscious. And would you encourage enlisting friends or family or people around you to also kind of, contribute?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're brave enough to ask them. I mean, I remember a few months ago, I'd stayed up very late. Normally, I'm very, very good at going to bed on time. And I had to stay up late for some work that I was doing. And the next day, it was really interesting, actually. Not only did my 7-minute workout that I do at 7 in the morning feel just a little bit more difficult, and I felt myself really feeling more hungry, but I also felt that everybody was just being unreasonably grumpy and a little bit high maintenance. And I said to my husband, is it me or is everybody just being ridiculously grumpy today? And he went, it's you, actually.
Oh, no.
So you have to be prepared to take the answer. But it was just, it was another huge self-awareness step. And it was really interesting to equate the two. But yeah, I think it is really useful to ask people around you, but you have to be prepared for the worst if you do that, and be prepared to take that they are trying to help you and you've asked them, but they may not give you an answer that you like.
And we create habits in like all parts of our lives, don't we?
Absolutely. So the way we think and, the way we have relationships with our children, our families, our brothers, our sisters, our friends, all of that is habit. And it all comes back to partly the way we think about things, but even emotions as well. And I think this is really interesting. When you think about music and you think about how music can be particularly emotive, if you want to get into that energetic, happy dance, you put on some happy music. Or if you feel like, oh, do you know what? I actually want to feel a little bit sad, so I'm going to put on some sad, melancholy music. Again, it's habits. It's all about the way we think. And it's partly because our brains, they love to predict. Our brains like to predict what's going to happen. When you watch a movie, you often know what the ending's going to be, but you want to watch the ending because you've predicted it. And so our brains work by predicting things. And these habits are our brains. So, we can listen to that music and it will put us in that emotional state, but it's because we have created that link from those those sounds to an emotion that we feel. And if you could trace it back, you might be able to point it to one particular time, but it might just be cultural that music says to us happy and joyful, and that's what we've learned over a lifetime of listening to music.
Yeah. And it happens so early on, doesn't it? Because I see that particularly in my son, who is 7 years old. He can listen to a piece of music and know that that invokes a sad emotion, or he can listen to a happy piece of music and then he'll be happy. So, you kind of like almost are trained from quite an early age, aren't you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, if you think about babies, they're like sponges. Think about how much they learn in the first 1 or 2 years of their life. They're developing so much. And obviously, they're immersed in our culture. And I think it's kind of a bit scary as parents, because you sort of think, well, my child's going to be fine. This bit, we're just sort of growing and feeding and growing and feeding. But actually, that's not the case. They're picking up so much, so many emotional cues, and even healthy eating habits. Children learn eating habits by the age of 3, which is really early on. Now, don't panic, because you can change your child's eating habits and teach them healthy eating. And I do think that it isn't natural. It isn't that we are naturally born as healthy eaters. We need to teach our children healthy eating habits. So if you think, oh my goodness, my child doesn't have healthy eating habits, don't worry, you can change them.
Yeah. And that's it, isn't it? It's the awareness, but with compassion, because it's okay. That's like where things are at now, and you can always change them to be more healthy and more positive. And Orlena, you talk about stages of a habit, don't you? What are the stages of a habit?
The first stage is to start to create the habit. So a habit isn't really formed until it comes out of our consciousness and we're no longer thinking about it. So people say, how long does it take to build up a habit? And you sort of make this effort to change your habits, and then you think, 5 days in, I still have to think about it. 10 days in, I still have to think about it. 2 years later, oh yeah, I did create that habit, and somehow it happened without you thinking about it, without you noticing. Now, the secret to having healthy habits is not discipline. People think, oh my goodness, you must be so disciplined because you do all these amazing healthy things. But the answer is no, it's not about discipline. It's about setting up your day. And I like to describe it as a little train. So it's like your thinking brain is somebody laying out the train tracks, and then, a toy train track. And then your habit brain just comes along and sort of scoots around it. And what I say is you want to make good habits easy and bad habits difficult. So let me give you a couple of examples. Now, in normal life, my children go to school in Spain here. They go to school in the morning and the afternoon. So at 3:00, they go back to school, and then they come home at 5:00. So at 2:30, I walk my children to school, and then I go down to the swimming pool. Now, that habit of going to the swimming pool starts at 2:30 when I pick up my swimming stuff and I walk out of the door to drop my children off, because I'm obviously not going to not do that. So I've put myself on this track where, in order to get out of it, I would have to make a concerted effort and think, you're really not going to do that. And then I find myself walking to the swimming pool, getting changed, standing at the edge of the pool with my trainer behind me going, right, you now need to do however many lengths. So as much as I love swimming, and I do, I've also trained myself to totally love swimming, there have been times when I'm a bit like, I'm tired, it's a bit cold, and I don't want to do this, but I just do it anyhow because that's how I've set my life up to do it. Another example is how we shop. So here in Spain, I go to the fruit and vegetable market on Sunday. I absolutely love it. It's wonderful. But guess what I can buy at the fruit and vegetable market? I can buy fruits and vegetables, and it's not like when you go to the supermarket and there's, all those tempting, delicious chocolates and muffins and all those other things. I just haven't put myself in that situation. It's much easier to buy fruit and vegetables if that's all there is to buy. It's not like I'm some super amazing woman who would never buy chocolate cake. I just make sure I don't put myself in front of chocolate cake as often as I put myself in front of vegetables.
I love what you say about habits not being, about discipline. There's no, and that kind of takes the blame aspect out of it as well. So I think that's a really important point that you made. And I want to talk to you about the length of time it takes to form a habit. How long does it roughly take to form a habit?
Well, that is a really interesting conversation, and there's I think conflicting advice and research about it. So some people say, well, you can form a habit really, really quickly. And I think that is true in terms of, for example, if you see lifelong smokers who are suddenly given a diagnosis of something horrible and they stop smoking instantly, they've broken that habit within a day or two. But I think on average, it's about 66 days. And the other thing I would say as well is that habits aren't necessarily things that we do every single day. They may be sporadic things. So the habit of voting, for example, is a habit. And obviously you vote every few years. And that habit of voting can also be broken. So for example, if you live in a place and you're on the electoral roll and the little piece of paper comes through and you know where to go to vote and you think of yourself as a voter, you're likely to keep up that habit. But if something happens, like, for example, you move house and now suddenly you don't know where you have to go and vote and it becomes more difficult, you may still think of yourself as a voter, but suddenly the day comes and goes and oops, you've forgotten to do it. So it's still a habit, but now it's been made more difficult and there's been more obstacles. So just a self-awareness thing, you want to be putting those obstacles in front of the bad habit. So perhaps your bad habit is I sit and I watch television in the evening, hide the remote control. It's an obstacle to stopping you from doing something.
That is great advice. And I would say, making bad habits difficult is so important, isn't it? Not buying the chocolate, not having it in the house, and you'd actually have to go out and physically get it and then bring it into the house. And there's nothing wrong with doing things on occasion, is there? Because we've all got to live.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the other thing that you're talking about there is really interesting, is that what I call a negative habit, so taking away, can sometimes be more difficult. So if you have the habit of, for example, eating chocolate, and you think, okay, after dinner, I eat chocolate and I want to stop that. Actually, it's more difficult than starting something, because you're now left with this void, and our brain is busy predicting, oh, chocolate comes after dinner, chocolate comes after dinner, and our brain doesn't stop predicting. And it's almost like we have to fight that for a much longer period of time. So one way around that is to replace it with something else. So you could say, okay, well, I'm not going to eat chocolate. I'm perhaps going to eat some fruit, or I'm going to have an infusion, or I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to do something different. And then you have a period of time where you're retraining your body, and that transition period feels difficult until you come out of the other end, and suddenly it's habit, and suddenly after dinner you go for a walk every single evening, and that's just your normal routine, and you're no longer even thinking about chocolate.
What would you say to people if they have a bad day?
That's a really interesting question, and I think it's really interesting to stand where you are now and think, I want to make these changes. This is what I want to do, whether it's you want to lose weight or become more healthy. This is where I want to be in a year's time. And people always think, oh, I'm going to walk there one step at a time. I'm going to make progress, 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 progress. And I say, you know what? It doesn't often happen like that. Actually, what happens in any endeavor that you do, you take a few steps forward, one step back, a few steps forward, one step back. And when you can stand there and anticipate that, you don't think, oh, I'm a failure. I've had a bad day. I've done this. I've done that. You think, that's interesting. It's what I call a golden learning opportunity. Why did this happen? And it's all about self-awareness. And so when you can have a look and think, I'm going to look at this with curiosity and compassion to myself and think, why has this happened? I set this intention to not eat chocolate for 2 weeks, and after 3 days, here I am on the way back from work eating chocolate. Well, why has that happened? Is it that I have this habit of filling up at this petrol station? And this is often what happens. It's more about location. So you go into that petrol station and you come out with a bar of chocolate, and that is just a habit of that place. So you could change the petrol station and, make sure you fill up somewhere else.
What I would like to know, Orlena, is can you give just a very brief kind of overview of a step-by-step process for forming a habit?
Yeah, forming a habit is really, really easy. It goes like this: repeat, repeat, repeat. So that is the basis of forming habit. However, you need to do it in a way that you are self-motivated. And I think inner motivation is the key here. So, for example, if you go to your friendly cardiologist and they say, you need to do some exercise to reduce your blood pressure, and you think, I want to do this because my cardiologist has told me to do this, you might not be very motivated, and it might be a little bit of a chore. And after a bit, it just falls by the wayside. But if you go and you have the same conversation and you think, do you know what? I want to reduce my blood pressure because I know it's going to increase my chance of having a long and healthy life. And I really want to have a long and healthy life, and I want to enjoy my long and healthy life. And suddenly you feel that you're doing it for yourself. And so it makes it easier to repeat that. So on one level, it is just really simple. It is just repeat, repeat, repeat. And you can see that we've built up habits from childhood because perhaps at school you had to do something which was repeat, repeat, repeat. Or your parents made you do something that was repeat, repeat, repeat. So on one level, it is as simple as that. But on another level, you have to repeat it enough to get it into that framework, to grind it in. And if you can't get through that bit and you haven't repeated it enough, that habit will not get formed, essentially.
Yeah. And what you say is really important. What we talk, the point that you very clearly made earlier is about making that habit easier. And there's there are lots of people who talk about habit stacking, so adding that habit onto another habit that you've already formed that's already unconscious. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different tricks and things that you can do to increase how successful you are at building habits. And habit stacking is one of them. I'll explain it um, in a minute. But I think the other thing as well is to think about your life and how busy you are and not to take on too much. So another important aspect is that if people try and change too many habits all at once, they often end up feeling overwhelmed, and then they end up going back to where they were. And if you aren't aware of this sort of science of habits, you end up, it's like the rickety bridge. You've been pulled back by an elastic band to where you were. And then when you're standing there, you feel like a failure, overwhelmed. And then that's not a good place to be, because then you feel that nothing works for you and you can't do anything. Whereas if you think of it as like, oh, I'm just a human with this human body and my brain, this is how my brain works, and I just haven't quite created that habit yet, you no longer feel like you're going to blame yourself. So if you're doing things by yourself, you want to just build up one habit. And when that's really a habit, you want to build up another habit. And I would say a caveat to that is, if you want to do things more quickly by working with a coach, you can do things more quickly because they hold you accountable and they are objective and can see where you are. And it can help you get there and create habits more quickly.
Yeah.
So going back to habit stacking, it's just really another way of, when you're at the beginning, remembering to do that. So for example, it might be, I've already remembered to brush my teeth. So now I'm going to remember to, whatever it is, do 2 minutes exercise or do it at the same time. I actually like to do exercises whilst I'm brushing my teeth. But because you already remember the first habit, you will remember the second habit and then you build it up. So it is a good way. And, other good ways are, for example, being specific about when you're going to do something. So, for example, you might say, my aim is to go for a walk every single day, or I'm going to start 3 minutes meditation. Now, unless you're specific about when you're going to do it, chances are a week will have passed and you think, I never quite got round to doing that. But if you say to somebody else, normally, I mean, you can just say it to yourself, but these things tend to work better if you have someone to hold you accountable. Okay, I'm going to finish dinner and then I'm going to do whatever new habit it is. When I have finished packing up the plates, I've swept the floor, now I'm going to go for a walk or do my meditation or whatever it is. And so you've created an actual time in your routine to do it, as opposed to optimistically hoping a little window will appear.
Yeah. Thank you. That's incredibly helpful, useful information. Orlena, what's a habit that you've formed that you're very proud of?
I think my exercise habit. So this is another interesting thing. In the same way that habits can be randomly good habits or bad habits, when habits are disrupted, you can then form new habits. So either good or bad habits. So when we look back into 2020, the entire world had their entire routine disrupted and people formed new habits. And now a lot of people formed not so healthy habits. They found themselves being far more sedentary and eating far more of those not so healthy foods. In reverse, here in Spain, we were in lockdown, total lockdown. We weren't allowed out of our house for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I could just see myself getting more and more sedentary and more frustrated. So the minute we were allowed out of our house, I was sort of like a little headless chicken running around going, I'm going to do some exercise. And over the last year, I've really increased the amount of exercise that I've done. And I think now at the age of 46, I'm fitter than I have ever been. I've started running. A year ago, I hadn't run more than 3 steps in 20 years, I don't think. So I think, really just embracing exercise and enjoying exercise. And it wasn't that I was unfit before. I was doing a lot of swimming before, but now I've added in cycling and running, and I'm proud of that.
Oh, congratulations. That is amazing. Well done, Orlena. That is a real achievement. And you've clearly made it a habit. So that's also a big achievement.
Yeah, and I love it. And I only go running once a week because I do so much cycling and swimming, but it's just keeping it up. And I know that if I don't do that once a week, then if I leave it for periods of time, it'll be more difficult to get back into it. So
yeah, It is. That's the thing with exercise, isn't it? And habits in general, once you stop, it's harder to then motivate yourself to do it again.
Well, yes, but you can then get back into it. So I did take a break from running over the summer because it gets really hot here. And then in the autumn, it is easier. You don't start from scratch. You start from halfway up.
Less of a mountain to climb. Less of a hill.
Exactly.
Yeah. Orlena, what are your top 5 tips? Top 5 tips for habits?
Oh my goodness. So I think number 1, find your inner motivation. That's the most important thing, and it's the thing that keeps you going. I think number 2, be realistic. So think about your busy life and what you are going to achieve. Number 3, be kind to yourself be kind and curious when things don't go according to plan. Number 4, enjoy it and have fun. I can't think of number 5. That's enough.
That is great. Maybe it's repeat.
Yes, repeat.
Repeat. Thank you so much, Orlena. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the episode. We're really grateful to Orlena for sharing all that wonderful information. If someone you know could find this episode helpful, then please do share. You can check out all the other episodes on our website, freshheartproject.com. We would be really grateful if you could comment, subscribe, and give this a 5-star rating. This helps us get the Fresh Heart message to more people. The content of this episode is not a substitute for medical advice from your healthcare professional. Remember, be kind to yourself, and small, sustainable steps create great change. This podcast is produced by Lion Mountain Entertainment, a subsidiary of Morgan Archway Limited.